The first knock came just after midnight. 3 slow, deliberate raps that did not belong to any lost traveler. Rowena froze beside the dying fire, her hand stilling over the iron pot. No one should be this deep in the black pine, not in winter, not during the claiming week, when every unmated woman was supposed to be locked inside the city walls, perfumed and paraded like cattle. She was supposed to be one of them. Another knock, heavier this time, rattled the warped door of the abandoned hunting cabin. Snow sifted down from the rafters. The wolves had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Rowena's heart slammed against her ribs. Only 3 kinds of men would find this place. Desperate bandits, royal hunters, or the Alpha King who'd ordered every runaway dragged back in chains. "Little lamb," a low voice called from the other side of the wood. Calm, amused, far too close. "You picked the wrong forest to hide in." The fire cracked. The door shook beneath a final patient knock. "Open up," the voice murmured, as if they weren't alone in a world that could eat her alive. "Or I'll huff, I'll puff, and I'll blow your pretty sanctuary down." Before we step inside that cabin, into the snow, the wolf eyes, and the Alpha King who doesn't knock twice, make sure you're settled in. If you love dark, twisty werewolf romances with obsessive alphas and runaways who refuse to bow, hit subscribe, tap the like button, and drop a comment at the end telling me what you'd do if the Alpha King showed up at your door. All right. Let's go back to the cabin. The knocking hasn't stopped. The claiming used to be a story Rowena heard in whispers, something that happened to other girls. Once a year, when the red moon rose over the city of Thorn, every unmated female between 16 and 25 was brought to the square and lined up like offerings. Alphas from all the high packs came to choose brides, bondmates, or acquisitions. It was sold as an honor, a sacred joining of bloodlines. No one spoke about the girls who came back changed, or not at all. Rowena hadn't meant to run, not at first. She'd spent months trying to be invisible, shrinking herself in hallways, hiding her scent beneath bitter herbs, praying the Alpha King's gaze would slide past her when he rode through inspecting the eligible. Kings took queens for alliances, not for love. And this one was said to be a storm in human skin. Aaron Blackveil, the Wolf of Thorn, the man who'd unified warring packs by breaking them. He'd never spare a glance for a merchant's daughter with ink stains on her fingers. Until he did. Until she felt his eyes on her in the market, heavy as a hand. Until the summons came with the royal crest, stating calmly that she'd been selected for the final circle of the claiming. Not yet chosen, but marked. From that night on, every breath tasted like a countdown. Her father tried to hide his terror behind pride, the king himself. He choked, smoothing her hair back. "You'll be above hunger, above fear. You'll never want for anything again, Ro. Except herself, except her life." Rowena had watched one of her friends return from last year's claiming with a mate mark on her throat and hollows under her eyes, flinching at sounds no one else could hear. She'd watched another girl's mother wail in the street when news came that her daughter had taken ill in the king's mountain keep. No body returned. No grave to mourn at. So 4 nights before the red moon, Rowena bought a stolen map, packed everything she could carry, and walked out of the city under a cart of salted hides. The Black Pine Forest was a legend. Wolves that weren't quite wolves, paths that moved beneath your feet, old gods sleeping beneath roots. Hunters refused to enter its deepest parts. That made it perfect. She found the cabin on the second day, half buried in snow, door hanging crooked. Inside, an old stone hearth, a straw mattress eaten by mice. A rusted chain bolted to one wall she tried very hard not to think about. Someone had lived here once. Someone dangerous or hunted, or both. She cleaned. She repaired. She learned to split wood without crushing her toes and to set snares that caught more than her own skirts. She listened for distant howls and tried not to imagine golden eyes watching from the tree line. As the days crawled past claiming week, she started to believe she'd gotten away. Until the tracks appeared at the edge of the clearing. Large, deep, too heavy for any normal wolf. A man's gait stitched between paw prints. Until the first knock came on her door at midnight. "Don't answer it!" Rowena whispered the order to herself as she stared at the trembling latch. Her breath ghosted in the cold air. The fire had burned low, embers sulking beneath a crust of ash. Shadows leaned long and strange across the walls. 3 nights ago, she'd heard howls circling distant ridges. Tonight, the woods were hushed, like everything living had stepped aside for whatever stood on her doorstep now. "Last chance," the voice outside said lightly. "You open the door, we talk. You keep me waiting." I let myself in. She'd barred it with a fallen beam wedged against the jamb. In theory, that might slow a man. The stories said it would not slow a wolf. Rowena's fingers slid along the only weapon she owned, a kitchen knife with a chipped point. Laughable against claws. Useless against a king. "He can't be here," she thought wildly. The Alpha King does not come alone into haunted forests for one runaway girl. But the tracks she'd seen that morning, deep, measured, the stride of something that weighed more than a normal beast, flashed back at her. The rumors of a black-furred monster that ran at the king's side, killing his enemies before they could even scream. What if they weren't rumors? What if the king and the monster were the same thing? The latch jiggled. The cabin's old wood whined in protest as a heavier force pressed against it. Snow hissed off the roof in a smooth sheet. Rowena swallowed hard. "Go away! Kay!" she called, cursing the tremor in her voice. "There's nothing here worth taking." A soft huff of laughter seeped through the gap. "Oh, little lamb," the man said. And she somehow felt his smile without seeing it. "You're worth kingdoms tearing each other apart. Did you truly think you could flee from a court full of wolves into a wolf forest and stay hidden?" Her blood turned to ice. "Who are you?" "Open this door," he whispered gently. "And I'll tell you with my own mouth instead of through rotten planks. Or you could leave." A pause. Snow crunched under shifting weight. "I could. But here's your problem. You ran from my claim." Rowena's lungs forgot how to work. "You're lying," she croaked. "The king is standing on your doorstep with half his court howling for your blood because you embarrassed him in front of every alpha in Thorn." The stranger said calmly, "I came alone to keep them from finding you first." A heartbeat, too. "If you're here," she whispered, "where are they?" "Circling," he said, "keeping their distance. They won't cross the Black Pine's deeper lines without me leading. Old magic makes them nervous. But if I don't walk out with you before dawn..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Rowena pictured a ring of warriors beyond the tree line, red cloaks, silver blades, leashed wolves pacing between trunks. Her little clearing painted in blood. She sucked in a breath that tasted like iron. "Why should I trust you?" "Don't," he said simply. "Trust that door. Do you think it'll hold when they decide to burn you out?" Heat licked her spine at the word burn. A gust of wind shouldered against the cabin, making it shudder. The fire on the hearth coughed and shrank. She'd banked it low to hide the smoke plume. Now she wished it were roaring. "Open the door, Rowena." Her heart stopped. "I never told you my name." "I know a great many things I shouldn't," the Alpha King murmured, "including exactly how many freckles you have on the back of your left shoulder. Now, are you coming willingly, or do you really want your story to end here in splinters and ash?" He's bluffing, she thought. He has to be. But she was alone, unmated, unshifted, without a packmark or a family crest. The black pine had teeth, but it wouldn't choose sides. Slowly, she slid the beam away. The weight of it nearly toppled her. The last barrier between Rowena and everything she'd run from knew sat at her feet. Her fingers hovered above the latch. She closed her eyes, inhaled once, and thought of all the girls who'd walked into the claiming square with no choice at all. At least she gets to open her own door. Rowena lifted the latch. The door swung inward on a breath of cold so sharp it felt like a slap. Snowflakes followed the stranger inside, spinning in the turbulence of his presence. He filled the doorway completely. Rowena had seen Aaron Blackveil once from a distance, watching from behind a cart in the marketplace as his retinue thundered past. Then he'd been all armor and shadow, wolf pelt thrown carelessly across his shoulders, the city's light catching on the silver at his temples. Here, in her doorway, he was somehow more and less than a king. His cloak was a plain dark wool, heavy with snow, not the crimson of thorn. No crown, no heraldry, no guards breathing down his neck. Just a tall man with winter in his hair and eyes like molten amber that caught the firelight and made it theirs. Rowena forced herself not to step back as he lowered his hood. Up close, the stories hadn't done him justice. He wasn't handsome in the way bards sang about. No soft curls, no gentle mouth. His features were all hard lines and sharp planes. A face carved for war and verdicts. A faint scar traced his jaw like a comet's tail. Her gaze flicked to his throat. No visible mate mark. No visible weakness. "Hello," he said quietly, as if they were meeting at a polite dinner rather than in the middle of a snow-strangled forest where he'd cornered her like prey. "You made me wait longer than anyone ever has." Rowena's grip tightened on the knife hidden in her skirts. "Close the door," she said. "You're letting the cold in." One dark brow lifted. But he stepped inside and nudged the door shut with a boot, sealing them into the narrow space between hearth and mattress. Instantly, she felt how small the cabin was, how little air there seemed to be. His scent hit her then. Smoke and pine and something wild underneath, like the air right before a storm breaks. The wolf in him coiled just under the skin, watching her with those impossible eyes. "You're not wearing a claiming collar," he observed, gaze sweeping the vulnerable line of her throat. "I suppose I should be offended you slipped the first one we sent." She bristled. "I slipped more than that." "Yes." A hint of a smile ghosted his mouth. "You slipped an entire fate, little lamb." The court hasn't stopped talking about you since. He moved toward the fire without asking permission, shrugging off his cloak. Rowena's eyes widened as it fell open. Beneath, he wore a simple black shirt, sleeves rolled to forearms scarred and strong. No armor, no weapons visible. He trusts himself that much, or me that little. How did you find me? She demanded, keeping the table between them. He crouched by the hearth, long fingers reaching for the poker as if he'd done this 100 times. Your scent. He said it as casually as ever. You tried to muddle it with herbs, but there's something odd about it. Like ash and starlight. Hard to miss once you've noticed. Heat prickled her cheeks. That sounds ridiculous. It sounds true. He stabbed at the embers, coaxing them back to life. Sparks leapt, catching on kindling. The growing flame gilded his profile in gold. You smelled like that when I first passed you in the market, you know. Rowena's chest tightened. I didn't see you. Good. He glanced back at her over his shoulder. If you had, you might have run sooner. And I'd have had less time to pretend I wasn't going to chase. He rose, poker still in hand, and studied her openly. Not like a king reviewing a subject. Like a predator measuring the distance to something it could reach in 2 strides. You have 3 options, Aaron said at last. 1. I collar you, drag you back to Thorn, and let the court watch you break. 2. I leave, call in my hunters, and they burn this place to the ground with you inside. Or 3. He paused. The fire popped, throwing shadows across his face. You come with me willingly, he finished, not as a prize for the claiming, but as something else. Something else, she echoed. What exactly? His jaw flexed. For the first time, she saw a crack in the effortless control. You embarrass me, Rowena, he said softly. You made every alpha in that square watch their king lose a chosen bride to the forest. Do you know what that does to a man whose power depends on fear? Her fingers dug into the rough wood of the table. Good. He huffed a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Yes. Good. I have ruled with teeth for so long I forgot what it felt like to be defied without a gender. He took 1 step closer, then another. He didn't touch her, but she felt it as if he had. So here's my offer, Aaron murmured. You spend the night here with me, doors barred, no one else allowed in, while I decide whether I want a queen who ran from me or a ghost to haunt me. At dawn, you give me your answer. We walk out of this forest together. His eyes darkened. Or not at all. Her pulse thundered in her ears. That's not an offer. That's a nicely worded threat. It's both. He lifted his hand, slow enough that she could have flinched away. She didn't. His fingers brushed a curl back from her face, knuckles almost reverent. You wanted a choice. I've carved you one out of a world that doesn't believe women deserve them. His touch burned, even though he barely grazed her. Behind his shoulders, through the warped cabin window, Rowena caught a glimpse of movement. Shapes pacing at the tree line. Eyes catching firelight. A loose ring of wolves and men, waiting. If she screamed, they'd come. Not to save her. She swallowed. And if I say no? His expression didn't change, but something in him went very, very still. Then I keep a promise I made to myself the moment I realized you'd run, he said. I do not force you. I simply stop protecting you from the others who will. The floor seemed to tilt. He's not the only monster hunting you. He's just the only one polite enough to knock. The words weren't spoken aloud, but she heard them all the same. Rowena licked dry lips. You're assuming I'll survive the night with you long enough to choose. Aaron's mouth curved. Not kindly, not cruelly, just knowing. I don't hurt what's mine, he begged. And whether you accept my claim or not, little lamb, you became mine the moment you made every alpha in Thorn look at me and wonder if I'd lost my touch. Outside, something howled. A deep, resonant sound that raised goosebumps along her arms. The Alpha King's eyes flared gold in answer. Sit, he said quietly, nodding to the single chair. We'll talk. We'll see which of us is more dangerous to the other. Rowena stayed standing. I'm not afraid of you. Then you're either very brave, he murmured, stepping past her to unbuckle his sword belt, or you have no idea what I am. By the time the fire had burned down to a steady heartbeat of coals, the storm outside had thickened into a white wall. Wind clawed at the cabin, probing every crack. Inside, it was almost warm. They sat across from each other at the rickety table, steam curling from 2 dented tin cups. Aaron had produced a flask from inside his cloak, pouring a dark liquid into the boiling water from her pot. The smell of spiced spirits unfurled through the room. For the shaking, he'd said when she eyed it suspiciously. If it's the cold that has you trembling. It's not, she'd replied, but she drank anyway. Now the flush on her cheeks was half from the heat, and half from the way he watched her over the rim of his cup, sharply, softly, like he was memorizing the way she breathed. Why did you run? He'd asked other questions already, about her childhood, her work in her father's bookshop, the herbs she'd burned to hide her scent. Those had been easy enough to answer. This one lodged in her throat. You know why? She said at last. Say it. Rowena stared at the swirling surface of her drink. Because the claiming isn't about love or choice. It's about power. I watched what it did to girls better than me. I didn't want to become a story people whispered about in markets when they thought no one was listening. He considered that. The fire painted restless light across his face. You think I would have broken you? He said quietly. Not a question. I think you don't know how not to. She shot back, then blinked at her own audacity. Spirits. Loosened her tongue. Fear sharpened it. You're a wolf born into a world that kneels when you pass. How do you even see people like me? As equals? Or as toys to distract you between wars? Aaron's jaw clenched. For a moment, real anger sparked in his eyes. Then it guttered out, leaving something heavier. My father treated women like bargaining chips. He said, my mother was his 4th queen. He never cared what any of them wanted. I watched him let the claiming turn into a market of meat. When I tore his banners down and took his throne, the alphas demanded I keep the tradition alive. They wanted reassurance nothing had truly changed. He shifted his gaze to the window, where the blizzard scratched at the glass. I told myself I could fix it from within, he continued, that I'd choose better, that I'd be better. His mouth twisted. Then I saw you in the market, ink-stained, head down, sent screaming wrong in a way that made my wolf pace for hours. Wrong, she echoed, bristling. Not like the others, he corrected. You didn't smell like fear. You smelled like a door I was supposed to walk through, and I'm a superstitious man when it comes to doors I didn't build. Her heart knocked against her ribs. So you marked me for the claiming. I pulled your name, he said. I made sure the collars never reached your neck. I was going to end the ceremony early, announce you as my queen before anyone else could lay claim. Rowena's throat went dry. You were going to drag me from a square full of women who never had a choice and crown me over their heads. Do you hear yourself? Silence fell, thick as the snow outside. He flinched, just barely, then huffed a self-mocking breath. Yes, he said. I hear myself now. Wind rocked the cabin. Somewhere in the woods, a branch snapped. Rowena pushed away from the table, agitation buzzing under her skin. You're not a god, Aaron. Saying his name felt like stepping onto thin ice. You don't get to fix a broken system by making one girl your exception. He watched her pace. His eyes tracked every movement, but he didn't rise. Then what do you suggest? He asked softly. I tear the claiming down from the roots and let the packs tear each other apart. I have enemies on every border waiting for a sign that my rule is weakening. One crack in the stone, and they'll shove a wedge in. Maybe the stone needs to crack, she said. He smiled without humor. Spoken like someone who's never had to watch a kingdom burn. She opened her mouth to retort, but never got the chance. The wolves hit the clearing like a wave. Rowena felt it first as a pressure at the base of her skull. The forest, which had been a constant murmur of distant sound, went abruptly, unnaturally quiet. Then came the low, rolling growl, vibrating through the cabin floorboards. Aaron's head snapped up. Stay here, he said, standing so fast his chair scraped back. What is it? Not mine. His gaze had gone distant, unfocused, like he was listening to something she couldn't hear. His nostrils flared. Too many, too close. He strode to the door, hand automatically reaching for a sword he'd already removed. He cursed under his breath and grabbed the poker instead. Rowena's pulse spiked. She snatched up her knife and followed. Stay back, he growled. And for the first time, the word wasn't a king's command. It was a wolf's. He wrenched the door open. The clearing was full of eyes. In the space where snow had lain undisturbed an hour ago, massive shapes now stood. Wolves the size of ponies, fur bristling, teeth bared. Their eyes gleamed an eerie unified silver she'd never seen before. Not the warm amber of Aaron's court wolves. This was moon metal, cold and sharp. At their center, a man leaned casually against a tree, cloak as white as the snow. His hair was silver too, braided back from a face that might have been handsome if not for the emptiness in his gaze. Well, well, the stranger drawled, clapping slowly. Our mighty Alpha King, reduced to playing house with a runaway lamb in the woods. Aaron's shoulders squared. The poker in his hand looked ridiculous, but his presence made the whole world seem to lean around him. Vael, he said flatly, you're a long way from your northern trenches. Rowena's stomach dropped. She knew that name. Varl Iceborn, Alpha of the Frostfangs. The one war Aeron hadn't quite managed to end. I smelled smoke, Vial said lazily. Thought I'd find a camp of your hunters. Imagine my delight when I found you instead. Alone. Mated to nothing. Guarding a girl who smells like prophecy. His eyes slid to Rowena. The weight of that gaze made her want to crawl out of her own skin. Stay inside, Aeron murmured, without looking back at her. Her feet refused. She's nothing to you, Aeron continued, voice level. Let us pass, and I'll forget I saw your mutts trespassing in my claim. Vale's smile thinned. You'll forget? He clicked his tongue. You remember the old tales, Black Vale? When ash meets starlight, the wolf crown cracks. That's what the crones said. I always wondered what ash and starlight would smell like. His nostrils flared. His smile sharpened. Now I know, he purred. She belongs to the one who finds her first. And that, Your Majesty, wasn't you. Aeron moved so fast Rowena almost missed it. One moment he was in the doorway, the next he was in the snow. Between her and Vial, poker leveled like a spear. Wolves surged forward, snarling, and then the air itself seemed to rip. Aeron's body convulsed. Bones cracked, horrifying and quick. His shirt tore as his spine bowed, muscles bulging, rearranging. Fur, black as midnight, exploded along his skin. His hands, fingers she'd watched cradle a cup so carefully, extended into claws. He fell to all fours with a heavy, earth-shaking thud. And then the Alpha King was gone. In his place stood a beast larger than anything Rowena had ever imagined. Golden eyes met her gaze for a single, searing heartbeat. Then the wolf turned away and leapt. The clearing became a blur of motion and sound. Black fur against white, silver teeth against snow. Vial's wolves lunged in coordinated waves. But Aeron was a storm made flesh, moving with a terrifying blend of instinct and strategy. He tore through the first line, sending bodies flying. Rowena's heart hammered high in her throat. Every time he disappeared beneath a pile of snapping jaws, she stopped breathing. Every time he burst free, flinging blood from his muzzle, her lungs burned with relief. Close the door. Vial's voice floated over the chaos. Unless you want to see your king die for you, little ashling. She spun. He was gone from his tree, nowhere in sight. Metal bit her throat. She froze as the cold edge of a dagger pressed against her skin from behind. Vial's breath ghosted her ear, charming and deadly. Such an interesting scent, he murmured. You do know the stories always said it'd be a queen who broke the crown, don't you? Never a king, never the men. The wolves' snarls dulled, as if coming through water. All Rowena could hear was her heartbeat, and the faint feral growl vibrating through the air from the massive black wolf tearing his way through Vial's pack. If you kill him, she whispered, trying not to move her throat against the blade, you'll start a war you can't win. If I mate you, Vial countered pleasantly, I end one before it begins. Imagine it, ice and thorn united, your king's power bleeding into mine. Aeron roared, the sound shook snow from branches. Rowena's fingers tightened around the knife hidden in her skirt. She could do nothing and watch these monsters barter her like cattle. Like the claiming all over again, just with sharper teeth. Or she could move. She slammed her elbow back as hard as she could, catching Vial in the ribs. He hissed, dagger nicking her skin. Pain flared hot. Before he could tighten his grip, she twisted, dropping her weight and driving her knife up toward where she hoped his thigh would be. Still met flesh. Vial grunted. His hold slipped just enough for her to wrench free and stumble into the snow. "Stupid," he snarled, lunging after her. "Brave, but stupid." The nearest silver-eyed wolf broke off from the fight and barreled toward her, jaws open. Rowena didn't think. She ran straight toward Aaron. "Here!" she screamed, ignoring the way the cold tore at her lungs. "Aaron!" His head whipped around at the sound of his name in her voice. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked. Wolf and girl, ash and starlight. Before the silver wolf hit her from behind. She went down hard, snow exploding around her. Claws pinned her shoulders, teeth gnashed inches from her face. Then the weight disappeared in a blur of black. Aaron's wolf slammed into the attacker, ripping it away from her with a snarl that sounded like murder. Vial cursed and whistled sharply. His wolves disengaged as one, pulling back to circle their bleeding alpha. "We'll finish this later," Vale spat, pressing a hand to his wounded thigh. His silver eyes burned into Rowena's. "Keep her safe, Black Veil. The world is always hungriest for what kings try to hide." Then they melted into the trees, leaving a circle of churned, bloody snow and the echo of their threat hanging in the air. Rowena lay panting, heart pounding. Slowly, the massive black wolf turned toward her. Snow clung to his fur in clumps. Blood darkened his muzzle, some his, most not. His sides heaved with exertion. He padded closer, movements careful now, measured. Up close, he was terrifying, beautiful, real. "Aaron," she whispered. He lowered his massive head until his nose brushed the cut on her throat. A low growl rumbled through him, not for her, but for the injury itself. Then, before her eyes, his body began to change again. Bones snapped back into place. Fur sank, limbs lengthened. In the space of a breath, she was staring at a man on his hands and knees in the snow, naked and shivering. He lifted his head. Golden eyes, the same as the wolf's, burned into hers. "You're bleeding," he rasped. "So are you," she shot back, though her fingers trembled when she reached for him. "And you're naked." His mouth twitched, raw and human and utterly himself. "Get used to it," he said, voice hoarse. "You wanted to know what I am." They stumbled back into the cabin together, leaving a smear of red on the snow. Rowena kicked the door shut with her heel, then immediately turned to bolt it, wedged the beam back in place, braced the wood with everything she had. Aaron leaned against the table, each breath hitching slightly. The cuts along his arms and ribs were already knitting, flesh pulling together in ways that made her stomach twist. The shift had healed most of the damage, but not all. Purple bruises blossomed beneath his skin like spilled ink. "You heal fast," she whispered. "Not from wolfsbane tail," he said, "or from a blade aimed at my heart." Her mind flashed back to Vial's dagger at her throat. The eerie way his wolves moved, just a single schooled unit. "Why didn't you tell me?" She rounded on him, anger finally bubbling past shock. That you can turn into that. That other alphas are hunting me because of a prophecy I've never heard. He met her fury head on. When exactly should I have brought it up? Before or after you accused me of seeing you as a toy? Yes, she snapped. Either would have done. His jaw ticked. For a moment, they just glared at each other, both shaking, both breathing too fast. Then Rowena's vision blurred. She swiped at her eyes, furious at the sting. I ran to the most dangerous place on the map, she said thickly. I thought if anything got to me, it would be the forest, not this. She gestured wildly. Kings turning into wolves, warlords smelling destiny on my skin. I just wanted to live. Silence pressed in, heavy and close. Aaron moved then, slowly, deliberately. He stepped away from the table, nudging a discarded shirt toward himself with his foot, before pulling it over his head. The hem barely covered his hips, but the gesture made him seem slightly less like a weapon and slightly more like a man. He stopped a pace away from her. He didn't reach out. I know what it is to just want to live, he said quietly. I clawed my way to that throne when I was younger than you are now. Every day, since I've woken up wondering which treaty, which compromise, which tradition will be the one that finally kills what's left of me. His gaze dropped to the faint line of blood on her throat. His eyes flashed, wolf bright. I didn't tell you about the prophecy, because I didn't want to see you look at yourself the way everyone looks at me, he admitted. Like a story someone else wrote the ending to. Her breath hitched. What does it say? He hesitated. That when ash meets starlight, the wolf crown cracks. And you think that's me? I know it is, he said simply. You smell like both. And Vial just confirmed the crones have been telling the same story in his mountains. Rowena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. So I'm not a person. I'm a weapon aimed at your neck. Aaron's expression hardened. You are not a weapon. You're a choice. My choice. You keep saying that like it means anything, she whispered. You chose me without asking. That's why I ran. He flinched. Then, slowly, something in his shoulders loosened. You're right. The words seemed to cost him. I chose alone. I've done that my whole life because no one ever told me I didn't have to. He took another step closer. Snow melted where his bare feet met the floorboards. So here. He spread his hands, as if offering his chest to a blade. I am not your king in this cabin. I am a man with a problem he can't solve by ordering people to move. And that problem is you, Rowena. Your fear. Your freedom. The way my wolf stands down when you look at him, like he's not a monster. Her throat tightened. I can march you back to Thorn, crown you in front of 1,000 howling packs and dare anyone to touch you without losing a hand, he said. That's the easiest path. The one everyone expects me to take. But if I do, I prove you right about me. About the claiming, about kings and their toys. He exhaled slowly. His breath fogged between them. Or, he continued, I can walk out of this forest empty-handed and tell my council the girl slipped away. I can let Vial and every other ambitious bastard hunt the legend they think you are, while I try to hold the kingdom together without you. Rowena's heart stuttered. You would just leave. If that's what it takes not to break you, he said. I won't like it. I'll smell you in every draft. I'll hear your voice every time the court goes quiet. I'll probably become a worse king for it. His mouth quirked. But better that than a king who sent a girl screaming into a gilded cage and called it destiny. Her eyes stung again. And the third option? He studied her, wolf and man both waiting on her next breath. The third, Aaron said softly, is that you come back with me as my equal. Not as a prize. Not as a prophecy fulfilled. As a queen who sits in my war room and says no when my instinct is to say kill. As the girl who already knows how to run from me and chooses every day not to. Her pulse thundered. You'd change the claiming? She asked. For me? I'll burn the square down myself if that's what you ask. He turned. But you need to understand, if you stand beside me when I do, the world will set its sights on you. Vile is just the first. Prophecies make people stupid and brave in equal measure. He reached out then, finally, fingers hovering near her cheek, but not quite touching. I can't promise safety, he murmured. Only power, and that we'll spend it together. She looked up at him, really looked, at the man who had come alone into a haunted forest to knock on a runaway's door. At the wolf who threw himself teeth first into danger the moment a blade touched her throat. At the king who could have taken what he wanted by force and instead stood here, offering her the one thing no one else had, a choice. I need time, she whispered. His hand dropped. You have until dawn. That's not time. It's all we have. His gaze flicked to the shutter, where the sky outside was paling from ink to slate. Vale won't wait long. Neither will my counsel. The moment the storm breaks, the hunt begins again, with or without me. Fear twisted in her gut, but under it, something else stirred. A reckless spark. This isn't just about you and me, she realized. If I go back as your queen, I'm not just choosing you. I'm choosing to stand in front of every girl who'll ever be dragged into that square and say, no more. Yes. And if I stay, then you live as you wanted, he said, free. Hidden. Until someone else smells ash and starlight and decides you're useful. Wind howled around the cabin, rattling the shutters like impatient fingers. Sleep, Aaron said quietly. Or try to. I'll keep watch. Where? He gestured vaguely toward the door. On 2 legs until my bones stop screaming, on 4 after that. You can't shift again so soon, she protested. You'll tear yourself apart. He smiled, tired and fond in a way that made her chest ache. Worried for your monster already? Worried for my possible future political partner? She mumbled. His breath hitched on what might have been a laugh. As you wish, little lamb, he begged. As you wish. She didn't sleep. Neither did he. They sat on opposite sides of the room, watching the fire and listening to the storm's slow death. With every log that cracked and fell to ash, the sky outside grew lighter. By the time the first pale line of dawn edged the horizon, Rowena's mind was a tangle of images. Vile's blade, Aaron's wolf tearing through a wall of silver, girls lined up in a square with their eyes empty and their throats bare. When she finally rose, legs unsteady, Aaron was already standing, cloak on, sword belted, wolf coiled under his skin. "Well?" he asked. Rowena took a breath that tasted like smoke and frost and the end of one life. "Take me home," she said. They walked out of the black pine as the sun climbed over the horizon, turning snow to blinding silver. Aaron's retinue surged forward the moment they emerged from the tree line. Wolves and warriors formed a protective shell around them, faces drawn tight with fury and relief. "Your Majesty!" one of his generals burst out, eyes flicking to Rowena like she was a ghost. "We lost your trail. We feared—" "I know what you feared," Aaron cut in, voice all iron again. "Stand down. No one touches her." The general swallowed and stepped back. Rowena felt a dozen eyes skate over her, curious, angry, hungry. Her scarred throat burned under their scrutiny. Aaron's hand found the small of her back. Not possessive. Anchoring. The ride back to Thorn blurred into cold and hooves and the steady thunder of a wolf pack pacing them just out of sight, shadows between trees. Aaron stayed close, his presence a wall between her and the world. By the time the city's outer walls loomed, claiming week was nearly over. Banners still hung from towers, red and gold snapping in the wind. The square at the heart of the city was already filling, girls in white dresses, families pressing close, nobles and alphas taking their places on raised platforms. Rowena's stomach churned. "This is madness," she muttered as they dismounted in a side alley. "You can't just ride in and announce, 'Surprise, the runaway is back and now she's queen.' They'll riot." Aaron adjusted his cloak, eyes hard. "Good. Let them." Before she could argue, he took her hand and marched her toward the square. Wefers rolled through the crowd like wind through wheat as they stepped onto the dais. Rowena heard her name hissed from a dozen mouths. That's her. The girl who ran. The one the king chased into the woods. At the center of the platform stood the claiming altar. A stone slab, polished by years of trembling hands gripping its edge. Above it, the wolf crown rested on a crimson cushion. Aaron released her fingers only long enough to snatch up the crown. To Rowena's shock, he didn't place it on his head. He held it above the altar instead. "My people!" he called, voice booming across the square. The noise fell to an uneasy murmur, then to silence. "We are gathered today to continue a tradition my father loved." Unease rippled through the nobles. This wasn't how the speeches went. "He believed the claiming proved our strength," Aaron went on, "that lining our daughters up like livestock and letting alphas pick which ones lived well and which ones vanished in the night kept us safe." Rowena watched faces in the crowd change, some shuddering, some flinching, some hardening in denial. "I believed I could fix his cruelty by doing it better," Aaron said, "by choosing carefully, by promising myself I wouldn't break the ones who ended up in my bed." Gasps, outrage. A few bitter laughs from the back, where the poorest families stood. He turned, eyes briefly finding Rowena's. The wolf in him flickered there, steadying. "Then one girl ran from me," he said. "She ran into a forest that should have killed her before my hunters ever caught her. She chose death over a crown she had never asked for." Every gaze swung to her. Rowena's cheeks flushed hot and cold. "I went after her," Aaron continued. "I found a war at our borders and a prophecy in the trees. I found enemies who smelled ash and starlight and saw a weapon to wield. His jaw flexed. And I found myself asking why I was more afraid of losing face than I was of losing her. The crown glittered in his raised hands. The claiming is over. Aaron Blackveil, you said. Forever! Chaos exploded. Alphas surged to their feet, shouting. Some of the older nobles turned purple, spitting words like tradition and order. Mothers in the back wept openly. Girls in white stared wide-eyed, as if not daring to believe their ears. At dawn today, I offered Rowena 3 choices. Aaron shouted over the din. Death, a cage, or a throne beside mine, with teeth sharp enough to crack the same crown my father wore. He slammed the wolf crown down onto the altar. Stone rang. She chose me, he said, not because of what I am, but in spite of it. Rowena stepped forward before fear could glue her feet in place. She chose all of you, she said, surprising herself as much as anyone. Her voice rang clear, carrying to the farthest edges of the square. The girls behind me, who were ready to walk to this stone because they didn't know they could say no. A hush fell, sharp and sudden. I ran because I didn't trust the man I'd heard about. She went on, heart hammering. The one who conquered with claws and ruled with fear. The one who would stand here and smile, while we pretended this was holy. Somewhere in the crowd, someone sobbed. But the man who came knocking on my cabin door did something my father never did, she said. He gave me a choice. He came alone, without witnesses, knowing I might turn him away and walk out of his life with nothing to hold me back. She looked at Aaron, really looked with the whole city watching. I chose to walk back with him, she said softly, because I will not let other girls be forced to choose between a crown and a grave when there's a third path, standing beside a king and making him better. A murmur, lower, more thoughtful, rustled through the crowd. One of the eldest alphas snarled, stepping forward. You would dismantle our customs for the sake of one girl. For the sake of all of them, Aaron snapped. Any woman who wants to court an alpha may do so, but no more collars, no more squares, no more buying and selling lives under the guise of ceremony. And if the packs refuse, another demanded. Aaron smiled then. It was not a pleasant expression. Then they can try to take what they think they're owed, he said. They'll find my queen and I bite harder together than I ever did alone. Something shifted in the air. Loyalty, fear, hope, mixing into something new. At the back of the crowd, a young woman in white lifted her chin. I choose myself, she called, voice shaking, eyes bright. Another joined her, then another. I choose myself. I choose my pack. I choose no one. The words spread like wildfire, catching on tongues that had never tasted such sentences before. Aaron watched it all with a look Rowena couldn't quite pass. Relief and terror and fierce pride braided together. Then his nostrils flared. His gaze snapped to the far wall. Vel. Rowena followed his line of sight and saw the northern alpha standing just inside the archway, cloaked and hooded, silver eyes gleaming. He offered her a mocking little half-bow when their gazes met. The wolf in Aaron surged so hard she felt it. His hand found her wrist, thumb pressing over her pulse, grounding them both. Careful, she murmured. The world is watching. Let them, he growled softly. I want them to see what happens to the first man who tries to claim what's mine now without asking. She squeezed his fingers. Then don't go to him. He blinked. What? Make him come to us, she said. On our terms, in our court, not in the shadows. Understanding dawned. His mouth curved, this time with real amusement. Spoken like a queen, he murmured. He raised their joined hands high, letting the whole square see the faint smear of blood on her throat, the ghost of a blade that hadn't finished its work, the mark of the night they'd almost both died. This is the last claiming, Aaron Blackwall declared. From this day forth, no woman will be taken from this square. Only those who walk into it with their heads high and their hearts willing will stand at my side. He turned to Rowena then. In front of his entire kingdom, enemies, allies, ghosts alike, he bowed his head. Rowena of the Black Pine, he said, voice dropping so only she really heard the tremor beneath the theatrics. Will you choose me again? The world held its breath. Rowena thought of the cabin, the knocks, the wolves, the way his wolf had flung itself between her and death without hesitation. Every day, she said, slipping her free hand into his. Until you give me a reason not to. He huffed a breath that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. Then let them come, he whispered, eyes flicking briefly to where Vale stood in the shadows. Let the world test us. Let them, she agreed. They're the ones who should be afraid. High above them, the storm finally broke apart. Clouds tearing to reveal a sun that felt like a promise. In the years to come, bards would argue about when the old era truly ended, when the last collar was thrown into the fire, when the last girl said no without fear, when the last alpha knelt to a queen who had once chosen death over a crown. Rowena would know the truth. It ended the night she hid in an abandoned cabin and a monster knocked on her door asking for her name instead of her obedience. It began the moment she answered. Years later, when the world called her the queen who broke the claiming, Rowena still measured her courage by that first winter night. By the trembling breath she took, the frozen latch beneath her palm, and the quiet, defiant way she opened the door and chose to let the Alpha King in.